Jupiter, Florida, a peaceful coastal town where life seemed idyllic. Gretchen Anthony, a 51-year-old warm-hearted mother and respected professional known for her kindness and dedication to her family. Her estranged husband, David Anthony, a 44-year-old fitness trainer with a charismatic persona but a troubled history, quickly became the focus of suspicion. Their marriage, once filled with promise, had dissolved into tension and estrangement. This is the story of how love, lies, and betrayal unraveled into a shocking and tragic crime that would haunt this community forever. Before we dive into this case, we'd appreciate it if you could take a moment to like and subscribe. Your support means a lot. Let's get started. Gretchen and David Anthony's relationship began like many others, with excitement and hope for the future. They met through mutual friends and quickly bonded over shared interests. David was charming and attentive, which drew Gretchen in, especially as a single mother. As their relationship progressed, Gretchen felt confident that David could offer her the stability and love she longed for. Eventually, they married, believing that their bond would be the foundation of a lasting, happy life. However, soon after their marriage, cracks began to appear. David's behavior became more controlling and possessive. He questioned Gretchen's every move and attempted to isolate her from friends and family. Over time, the relationship shifted from one of mutual love to one marked by emotional abuse. David's jealousy escalated, and his temper flared over trivial matters. Despite Gretchen's growing unhappiness, she held on, hoping things would improve. But as the years went by, David's behavior only worsened. Eventually, Gretchen realized she could no longer stay in the marriage. The emotional toll was too great, and she made the difficult decision to file for divorce, seeking freedom from his manipulation and control. It was a seemingly normal day in Jupiter, Florida, on March 20, 2020. But for Gretchen Anthony's friends and family, unease quickly set in when they began receiving strange and unsettling text messages from her phone. The texts claimed that Gretchen had tested positive for COVID-19 and was being taken to a medical facility for treatment. The messages were written in a detached tone, a stark contrast to Gretchen's usual warm and thoughtful communication style. Something didn't feel right. Her friends and family initially gave her the benefit of the doubt. After all, the COVID-19 pandemic was in full swing, and hospitals across the country were overwhelmed. However, as the hours turned into days, their worry deepened. Calls to Gretchen's phone went unanswered. Texts asking for more details about her condition were met with vague and cryptic responses. It felt as if the person on the other end of the line wasn't Gretchen at all. The real alarm came when Gretchen failed to show up for work or contact anyone. Known for her reliability and dedication, her unexplained absence was deeply concerning. One of her close friends decided to check on her at home. What they found only raised more questions. Gretchen's house was eerily quiet, with no sign of her anywhere. However, there was a broken window at the back of the house, and the smell of bleach lingered in the air, a smell that hinted at an attempt to clean up something sinister. The friend immediately contacted the Jupiter Police Department, and officers arrived to conduct a welfare check. Inside the house, they found more troubling evidence. Furniture was overturned, and there were signs of a struggle. Yet, Gretchen was nowhere to be found. A search of her home revealed no personal items missing. Her wallet, keys, and phone were still there, as if she had vanished into thin air. As officers began canvassing the neighborhood, they discovered an unexpected lead. A neighbor's security camera had captured footage from the night of Gretchen's disappearance. The video showed a man entering Gretchen's home and later leaving with something large and wrapped in what appeared to be a blanket. Upon closer inspection, the man was identified as David Anthony, Gretchen's estranged husband. David had been acting erratically in recent months, and their divorce had been finalized only weeks earlier. This revelation shifted the focus of the investigation. Was Gretchen a victim of foul play? And if so, what role did David play in her sudden disappearance? What had begun as a search for a missing person was quickly escalating into a full-blown criminal investigation. The discovery of David's connection to Gretchen's disappearance marked the beginning of a race against time. Detectives knew they needed to piece together the events of that fateful night before it was too late. Little did they know, the truth they were about to uncover would be far more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. With Gretchen Anthony officially declared missing, the Jupiter Police Department launched a full-scale investigation. Detectives began by interviewing her friends, family, and neighbors, piecing together a timeline of events leading up to her disappearance. The mysterious text messages claiming Gretchen had COVID-19 and was seeking medical treatment immediately raised red flags. A check with local hospitals confirmed no record of her being admitted, deepening suspicions that something far more sinister was at play. The footage from a neighbor's security camera proved to be a critical lead. The man seen entering Gretchen's home and leaving with a large object was identified as her estranged husband, 44-year-old David Anthony. Known for his charm and fitness-focused lifestyle, David had a darker side. Interviews revealed he had been struggling with emotional instability and financial difficulties since the couple's separation. Detectives tracked David's movements in the days following Gretchen's disappearance. His behavior raised further alarms. David had suddenly left Jupiter, abandoning his life without explanation. His phone records indicated he was on the move, heading westward across state lines. Investigators began coordinating with law enforcement agencies across multiple states to locate him. Back at Gretchen's home, forensic teams worked tirelessly to uncover evidence. The smell of bleach hinted at an attempt to clean up the scene, but traces of blood were found in several areas, including the garage. DNA analysis confirmed the blood belonged to Gretchen, and luminol tests revealed additional signs of a violent struggle. These findings pointed toward foul play, but without a body, detectives couldn't confirm the worst. Meanwhile, David's erratic actions became even more suspicious. Detectives discovered that he had been attempting to sell Gretchen's car, claiming she no longer needed it. He had also made several cash withdrawals from her bank account, further implicating him in her disappearance. A search warrant for his digital devices revealed incriminating evidence, including searches for phrases like "how to make someone disappear" and "cleaning up a crime scene." The case against him was building, but detectives needed a definitive breakthrough. One of the most pivotal moments in the investigation came when witnesses came forward with sightings of David acting suspiciously. In Pensacola, Florida, a woman reported seeing him in a parking lot, behaving erratically and appearing to live out of his car. This lead helped police track his movements and predict his next steps. To gain more insight, detectives interviewed Gretchen's close friends and family about the couple's history. They learned that Gretchen had been fearful of David in the months leading up to her disappearance. The relationship had grown increasingly volatile, and she had confided in friends about David's controlling and threatening behavior. This information painted a chilling picture of a man whose charm had given way to desperation and rage. The investigation intensified as detectives closed in on David. With a mounting pile of evidence, including the surveillance footage, forensic findings, and witness testimonies, authorities issued a warrant for his arrest. However, David remained on the run, evading capture and leaving investigators racing against the clock to locate him, and hopefully find Gretchen before it was too late. As the investigation reached its peak, the nation watched with bated breath. What had happened to Gretchen Anthony? And would justice be served for the kind-hearted woman who had vanished from her quiet Florida neighborhood? The answers lay in uncovering the final pieces of this twisted and tragic puzzle. The search for David Anthony intensified as authorities tracked his movements across state lines. With mounting evidence linking him to Gretchen's disappearance, an arrest warrant was issued, and law enforcement agencies across multiple states were notified. David's erratic behavior and attempts to stay off the grid complicated the manhunt, but detectives remained determined to bring him in. The breakthrough came on March 31, 2020, in Las Cruces, New Mexico, 11 days after Gretchen's disappearance. Local police, acting on a tip, located David's vehicle in a supermarket parking lot. Surveillance footage confirmed he had been using the store for supplies. Officers set up surveillance around the area and, within hours, spotted David emerging from his vehicle. He appeared disheveled and nervous, a stark contrast to the charismatic fitness trainer he had once been. David was taken into custody without incident, though he initially tried to deflect suspicion. He claimed to have no knowledge of Gretchen's whereabouts and insisted he was innocent. However, the evidence against him was overwhelming. Detectives presented the surveillance footage, forensic findings, and witness accounts, cornering David into a position where denial was no longer plausible. Under intense interrogation, David's composure began to crack. Investigators used a combination of psychological pressure and empathy, appealing to any remaining sense of guilt or humanity he might have felt. After hours of questioning, David finally broke down and confessed to what had happened. His version of events was chilling. According to David, the events of March 20th had spiraled out of control. He admitted to going to Gretchen's house to confront her about their divorce and financial matters. What began as a heated argument escalated into violence. In a fit of rage, David claimed he struck Gretchen, causing her to fall and sustain serious injuries. Realizing the gravity of what he had done, he panicked. Instead of seeking help, he attempted to cover up the crime. David described how he tried to clean the scene using bleach, but the extent of the blood made it impossible. He admitted to wrapping Gretchen's body in a blanket and placing it in his vehicle. He drove to a remote location in Florida, where he disposed of her body. Investigators pressed him for details on the location, and after hours of back and forth, David provided coordinates to where he had left her remains. The next day, detectives followed David's directions to a wooded area in northern Florida. After an extensive search, they discovered human remains matching Gretchen's description. Forensic analysis later confirmed the remains were hers, bringing a tragic end to the search and shattering the hopes of those who had prayed for her safe return. David's confession was a turning point in the case, providing closure to some questions while opening the door to new ones. Why had a man who once loved Gretchen allowed his anger and desperation to lead to such a horrific act? What could have been done to prevent this tragedy? For Gretchen's loved ones, the answers offered little solace, as they grappled with the profound loss of a woman who had meant so much to so many. As David was formally charged with second-degree murder and other offenses, the case transitioned from investigation to prosecution. The world would soon learn the full extent of the betrayal and violence that had shattered the life of Gretchen Anthony, and left a community forever changed. Following David Anthony's confession, investigators focused on the coordinates he provided. The location was a remote wooded area in northern Florida, miles away from any major city. It was a desolate, quiet place, a location David likely believed would ensure Gretchen's body would never be found. Detectives, forensic teams, and search crews converged on the site, determined to recover Gretchen's remains and bring a semblance of closure to her grieving family. The search began early in the morning, with investigators meticulously combing through the area. The thick underbrush and uneven terrain made the search challenging. Forensic experts used cadaver dogs trained to detect human remains, and within a few hours, the dogs alerted the team to a specific spot. The area was cordoned off, and investigators began carefully digging. As the first signs of human remains emerged, a somber silence fell over the search team. It was evident they had found Gretchen Anthony. Her body was wrapped in a blanket, consistent with David's confession. The remains were transported to the medical examiner's office for further analysis, where forensic experts confirmed her identity through dental records and DNA testing. The autopsy provided crucial details about Gretchen's final moments. It revealed evidence of blunt force trauma, consistent with David's account of a violent altercation. However, it also showed signs of strangulation, suggesting a prolonged and intentional act. This raised questions about the full extent of David's actions and his state of mind during the crime. The discovery of Gretchen's body brought devastating news to her family and friends. For weeks, they had held on to a sliver of hope that she might still be alive. The confirmation of her death shattered those hopes and left a void that could never be filled. Gretchen's daughter, family members, and close friends struggled to come to terms with the brutal reality of what had happened. The recovery of Gretchen's body also provided investigators with critical evidence for the prosecution. Soil samples, fibers from the blanket, and the condition of her remains all corroborated David's confession and established a timeline of events. These findings would later play a pivotal role in the legal proceedings, ensuring David would face justice for his actions. As news of the discovery spread, the community of Jupiter, Florida, mourned the loss of a vibrant, kind-hearted woman whose life had been cut short by senseless violence. Neighbors and friends organized vigils in Gretchen's memory, lighting candles and sharing stories of her warmth and generosity. The discovery of her body brought a measure of closure, but it also underscored the deep impact of her loss on everyone who knew her. The focus now shifted to ensuring Gretchen's story would be told in full and that her killer would be held accountable. The tragedy of her death highlighted the dangers of domestic violence and the need for stronger support systems for those in abusive relationships. As the case moved toward trial, the community rallied around Gretchen's family, determined to honor her memory and seek justice for a life taken too soon. The trial of David Anthony began in the summer of 2020, drawing significant attention due to the brutal nature of the crime and the widespread media coverage surrounding Gretchen's disappearance and subsequent discovery. The courtroom was tense, filled with onlookers, reporters, and Gretchen's devastated family, all eager for justice. David Anthony, wearing an orange jumpsuit, sat quietly as the proceedings commenced. He faced charges of second-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a corpse. The prosecution's case was powerful and straightforward. They presented evidence that directly tied David to Gretchen's death, his confession, the forensic evidence, and the details of the crime scene that matched his description. The prosecution called on the medical examiner to testify about the autopsy findings, revealing the blunt force trauma and strangulation that led to Gretchen's death. The defense, however, tried to argue that David was in an emotional state during the crime, attempting to convince the jury that it had been a crime of passion, not premeditation. The prosecution focused on the fact that David had planned his actions in advance. The meticulous way he had covered up the crime, including cleaning the scene with bleach and driving Gretchen's body to a remote location, contradicted any claim of a spur-of-the-moment outburst. Additionally, the prosecution pointed out that David's decision to flee and avoid capture demonstrated his awareness of the severity of his actions. They painted a picture of a man who had been driven by anger and control issues, someone who had reached a breaking point with Gretchen, but had always been in control of his decisions leading up to the murder. Gretchen's family and friends were emotional as they gave victim impact statements, speaking about the kind-hearted, loving woman they had lost. They described the devastation they felt knowing that Gretchen's life was taken by someone she had once trusted. Her daughter, in particular, gave an emotional statement, expressing the pain of losing her mother at such a young age. The defense attempted to mitigate the severity of David's actions, claiming that he had been emotionally overwhelmed by the dissolution of his relationship with Gretchen and the challenges he faced in his personal life. They argued that David had struggled with his mental health and was under extreme stress at the time of the crime. However, this argument failed to sway the jury, as the overwhelming evidence painted a picture of deliberate violence. After several days of testimony and deliberations, the jury reached a verdict: guilty of second-degree murder. David Anthony was convicted for taking Gretchen's life, but the case wasn't over yet. The focus now shifted to the sentencing phase. During sentencing, the prosecution called for the maximum penalty, emphasizing the brutal nature of the crime and David's attempts to cover it up. The defense, in turn, pleaded for leniency, asking the judge to consider David's emotional state at the time of the murder. They argued that he had been a good person before the crime, and that this act was an unfortunate, tragic result of his mental health struggles. The judge, however, noted the coldness with which David had disposed of Gretchen's body and the level of premeditation involved in his actions. In his ruling, the judge stated that the crime was an act of calculated violence, not a moment of passion, and that David had shown no remorse throughout the proceedings. David Anthony was sentenced to 25 years in prison for the second-degree murder charge, along with additional sentences for tampering with evidence and abuse of a corpse. As he was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, Gretchen's family felt a small sense of relief, knowing that justice had been served, but the pain of their loss would never fully go away. For Gretchen's loved ones, the trial and conviction brought a measure of closure. They had seen the justice system hold David accountable for his actions, but no verdict could ever undo the devastation caused by his senseless act. Gretchen's family and friends continued to honor her memory, keeping her spirit alive by supporting causes related to domestic violence and advocating for stronger protections for victims of abusive relationships. David Anthony's trial and conviction highlighted the dangers of controlling, manipulative behavior in relationships and served as a sobering reminder of the extreme consequences that can result when anger and jealousy spiral out of control. The case also raised awareness about the emotional toll that such violent crimes leave behind, and the strength required for families to heal from such a traumatic loss. Gretchen Anthony was more than a victim. She was a mother, a friend, and a light in her community. Her death sparked conversations about the warning signs of abuse and the importance of acting when something feels wrong. In the wake of this tragedy, her loved ones have worked to honor her memory, ensuring that her story is never forgotten. Gretchen's life, though cut short, continues to inspire those who knew her to live with kindness and courage. The murder of Gretchen Anthony shocked a community and captured the nation's attention. It's a chilling reminder that danger can sometimes hide in plain sight. What are your thoughts on this true crime case? Share your opinions in the comments below.